This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to announce the release of my new book, Obama's True Legacy: How He Transformed America. There's a reason why Mike Huckabee calls it a ferocious and chilling read. Order it now at Amazon.com or at FrontPageMag.com. Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. With us this evening, Dr. Carrie Gress, the author of the new book, The End of Woman: How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. Carrie, what an honor and a privilege to have you on the Glazov Gang.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be here.
And it's great to have you. I'm a big fan, if that's one word to use, and have read several of your works. It's a true honor to have you here. Let's begin with you giving us a little bit more of an introduction about yourself. There's a lot to say, and maybe you can just tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll give you the thumbnail sketch. So I'm a mom of 5 kids. I have a doctorate in philosophy from the Catholic University of America. I am a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And The End of Woman is my 10th book. So I've got a lot of, and I'm the editor of the online women's magazine, Theology of Home, too. So I've got a lot of balls in the air.
Well, thank you, Carrie. You say you have 5 children. It's a little bit of the core of what we'll be discussing this evening, because feminism pretends it wants to help women, but by telling them to be a man. And you've made that very clear in your work. I've read your book. The Anti-Mary Exposed. It meant a lot to me. I want to talk a little bit about Jesus's mom tonight, which you touch on in your work as well. Before I begin with the first question, just some of the things I just said, would you like to respond?
Yeah, no, I think that you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think feminism has really started with the wrong question to begin with. And that was the question of how do we make women more like men? And largely because the women saw that men, or believed that men had an easier life. And this is just really snowballed. And so now we're witnessing the logical extension of that, which is actually transitioning, trying to transition women biologically into men. So it's been a long progression and very, very subtle. But definitely a way, chock full of lies and really misguiding and misleading women. And, I think we see that with the amount of unhappiness that we see in women, the breakdown of the family, all the civilizational issues. So I think you started in the right place.
Thank you, Carrie. Your work in this book is very, very deep. It's central to our struggle, really, over all of these issues, how to solve suffering of humans. My parents are from the Soviet Union. They were dissidents there. And I've spent my entire life grappling with these issues, because the longing for communism comes out of, as we know, a lot of injustice. There's injustice in this world. And yet the devil is very sneaky, because he comes in and says, oh, look what's wrong here. So here's a solution. And then what communism tries to fix, well, the very idea, negation of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. Thou shalt not steal. And so, et cetera, et cetera. Now, why I'm saying that leading into something very profound in your work, because just in terms of what I was saying, some people think, oh, well, the left, Bill Maher says this a lot. Oh, well, the left had a good idea. The left was good. Then the left went crazy. No. The left didn't go crazy. The very root of the left is wrong. And so you've talked about how you were struggling with these issues as well. And when you began writing this work and studying feminism, you thought that there was a good feminism in the beginning, and then kind of feminism went astray. And in your study, in terms of maybe my unsuccessful tirade at the moment, you saw that even the roots of feminism were misplaced and flawed. So let me give you the floor. Let's begin the conversation with those roots.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, this exactly the way you described it. This was truly what I found. I had this impression that I would, start this book and really be able to say some nice things about the first wave of feminism. I thought that there was sort of this pure, more soft and gentle kind of idea of it. And the more I started to get into it, I really realized that it just was never there from the beginning. And curiously, or maybe even ironically, it was actually the very definition of feminism and what has come forward to us was actually articulated first by a man, and that was the English poet, romantic poet Percy Shelley, who took these three strains, and these three strains you can sort of see weaving in and out of feminism. Of course, there's all kinds of confusions and things expand and contract over time. And I think in the 1900s it moves on to communism, the way that you were setting up the context. But prior to that, you've got this notion of egalitarianism, which comes from Mary Wollstonecraft, who was a big follower of Thomas Paine's. And Thomas Paine, of course, is considered the founder of one of the founders of socialism. So Mary Wollstonecraft's ideas get to Percy Shelley because Percy Shelley married her daughter, Mary Godwin Shelley, who, of course, wrote Frankenstein. So he puts together that idea. He puts together the idea of free love, and he puts together the idea of the occult, these three things. And that's really what kind of weaves through feminism. You see it very pointedly in the work of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, especially, and by extension, Susan B. Anthony, because Susan B. Anthony was really a mouthpiece for Cady Stanton. So that's really the first century of feminism. And then it moves forward in the 1900s and really kind of latches on with communism. The goals are really the same of free love, destroying the family, of course, egalitarianism, and then instead of the occult, it was atheism that communism embraced. So you can see how they just lock together very, very easily. And that idea comes to bloom with the work of Betty Friedan and the start of the second wave of feminism.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. When you mention Mary Wollstonecraft, just what you document in your book, it's just heartbreaking. And we see the childhood of a lot of these feminists. And when you read about her and her childhood and how her dad beat her mom and how she would even lay in the entrance to the bedroom to try to prevent her dad from beating the mom. And then the beatings because of that even got worse. And it's just one example here. Just, we dedicate a lot of our time here at the Glazov Gang to fighting for women and girls who are persecuted under Islamic gender apartheid and in general gender apartheid throughout the world. I could go on about that, but the answer is not to try to put, excuse me, this is a PG show, but sometimes we have to say some things. The answer is not to try to put a penis on a woman and to tell her that she can become a man. And so we're struggling with these issues here. So let's continue here that Carrie, when you write about Madonna, the pop icon or whatever we want to call her, and all that satanic imagery and a lot of the satanic imagery that we see in Hollywood, etc., in terms of empowering women. This is not a coincidence. And in your work, it's just fascinating. You document how these early feminists, they tried to overturn the meaning of Genesis, that actually the serpent and Eve were the heroes in the story. And I think that that's just crucial. You document it very powerfully. Why don't you touch on that a little bit, the satanic element in these roots?
Yeah, no, that was really a key element, and one that Percy Shelley brought to the table from his own desire to be engaged in the occult. I mean, he's known for really being an egregious man, but much of that was because he was either faithless or he was trying to connect with the devil. He's apparently spent the night in a tomb one night trying to connect with the devil. And anyway, this was sort of part of the culture that he was engaged in, and part of that was also just this rewriting that he did of Genesis 3, where Eve, as you mentioned, Eve is the heroine. She's given this opportunity, this kind of knowledge from the serpent in the Genesis 3. So you see this idea in his work. He takes it from Milton, actually. And then, you move forward and you see this very same idea in the work of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And so many of the other early feminists embraced this idea, really rejected Christianity wholesale, and, wanted to really idolize the woman and, do it in this very cult-like kind of fashion. So you see this recurring pattern, like you mentioned. It's just these waves come over and over again of, it looks new in each generation that it happens, sort of like it looks like the occult is sort of this new thing, happening now, where it's not really even hidden anymore. But it was very much alive in the 1970s with the beginning of second wave feminism. There's a book called The Sisterhood is Powerful, which was edited by Robin Morgan. And it actually talks about this group called Witch. It's an acronym for something, I can't remember exactly what, but this witch organization is very much promoting witchcraft. And even in the appendix of the book, it includes like everyday spells that, you might need at certain points. So this has been a common and consistent thread. And you can see it because when you take Christianity out of the picture, what's left? I mean, it's paganism. I mean, we see this everywhere, but not just feminism. Whenever Christianity and Judaism are weak, paganism is going to, like a jungle, encroach upon it. And women in particular obviously have this propensity to move towards witchcraft, largely because witchcraft feels empowering. It feels like a way to control things. Of course, that's, they end up being controlled by it, not realizing that they're not really controlling anything. But that's really where I think what the desire comes from, because it's so many broken women that they want change, or they want power, or they want control. They don't understand that what they really need is healing and restoration. They need the 10 commandments. They need these things to protect them. And that's really what's been thrown out.
Thank you, Carrie. So much to say there. The brokenness of these women, when we study, you documented very well the childhood of a lot of these feminists, the lack of their mom's love and affirmation. Very, very interesting. And then, of course, all the abortions and the lesbianism and just everything that they try to fill their lives with. But let's talk a little bit about the brokenness in their childhoods and the lack of love from the mother. It's very interesting. And I often think of that because when you've touched on very often in a lot of your interviews too, just this anti-Mary disposition in our culture. And I found that the people who've been very angry with me when even I mention Mary, when you look into their background, they're not that close to their mothers. Something is very interesting here. Let you go with that.
Well, I think in a lot of respects, this is how I started thinking about this. It was actually when Hillary Clinton was campaigning for president. And at one point I was studying the Virgin Mary and just seeing the different ways in which she has been influential throughout the centuries and saved Christians or converted Christians, like in the case of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico, which is the largest conversion of pagan people to Christianity that we have on record. So that, I was contrasting that kind of work with Hillary Clinton's campaign, and it, something suddenly clicked in my mind, and I just realized, these women, these elite women that are really running our country, aren't just sort of slightly, off Christianity, in small ways, but they're actually diametrically opposed to everything that the Virgin Mary stands for, which is, of course, the model of Christianity in terms of her receptivity and openness to the life of Christ and the support of it and whatnot. You also have this push for abortion, which is, very anti-life, and of course the Virgin Mary is very pro-life. All of these kinds of ideas are at work in the elite women, and that was really what got me thinking, and how I came up with the book, The Anti-Mary Exposed. Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity is actually the subtitle, which got the book banned from Instagram and Facebook marketplaces because they didn't like the title, the subtitle. But in any event, I think this is what we're really seeing is this. If you look at the institutions that we have and how much they've been taken over by these elite women, there's absolutely this this kind of narcissism, but also, as you mentioned, the brokenness. Someone like Gloria Steinem, who's obviously still living, but has been very involved in the movement from almost the very beginning. She talks very openly about the abortion that she had and how her career would have been ruined if she had had that child. And but you could see it, this is a woman, her father was absent from the family, was sort of this traveling salesman, and her mother was mentally ill. And she did, all kinds of things as a young girl by herself. Her sister had left home to take care of her mentally ill mother. So there's all this, she's just one example of so many broken women who are really battling these kinds of demons. And the battle they're not looking in the right place to heal it. They're trying to change what's outside of them instead of recognize something interiorly has to be changed and filled. And sadly, that will never be filled by, anything but God. And that's what they're absolutely rejecting. So it just becomes this impasse where they just need to keep finding more and more ways to sort of distract themselves and feel like they're making progress. When in fact, if you look at what the women's movement has done to women, it hasn't led us to any kind of happiness. That we're seeing the metrics that make it very clear that women are more depressed, more suicidal, more substance abuse, more divorce, all of these kinds of indicators that are showing us that women are not happy. And yet we continue to go along with it and not scrutinize and say, maybe there's some problems with this.
Thank you, Carrie. Something so beautiful that you stress. I was watching a few of your interviews, and you talk about your own journey and your own struggles, and there was a point in your life where you found so much happiness and you were thinking, well, what is it? And it's because you were taking care of your kids and you were serving somebody else. Yeah. And you make this very, in each of us have our journey in that way, that we look for happiness, and then somewhere we realize it's really about just Jesus Christ and serving others. And because there's not any of these easy solutions for our problems in the world, the way that communism and feminism and these totalitarian movements try to say that there is. So I think about this anti-God message, and you point this out very powerfully in your work, that when you look at these feminists, for instance, that you document, and so the first question that could be asked is, if you were to ask them, so how is this good for children? That's not something that they think about, but you would think that it would be the most important question. But a lot of promiscuity, a lot of open love, but somewhere they don't consider the children. And I think that's a very crucial element there. And because there's a message in the Bible, be fruitful and multiply. And feminism is the exact opposite of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is probably one of the most fundamental points that we have missed in the culture in terms of recognizing, especially the problem of abortion. Where does it come from? It's absolutely, came from feminism, because feminism, again, gave us this idea that we were supposed to be more like men. Well, what does it mean to be more like a man? That means you appear to be sterile. You are not, gestating a baby for 9 months and then raising a child for 18 years. You're not breastfeeding, all these kinds of things. So that really became a goal in the 1900s, was to control our fertility. And this is where, the break came. And you can see it very clearly in the 1960s, where this idea germinated that the obstacle or the block to our happiness was husbands and was babies, that those things were going to be impediments to our happiness instead of avenues through which we achieve happiness. And that's so incredibly alive today. In fact, there's so many articles I've seen, even just this week, about, young millennials trying to figure out whether or not they should have children and weighing all of the pieces. And, just the concluding piece usually comes down to, well, it's really going to impede my lifestyle. It's going to impede my pocketbook. I'm not going to have all of this freedom, and I might suffer. It might be hard. So it's remarkable how far we have gotten from this understanding of what is it that makes woman fundamentally, what is at the essential who she is. She's a mother, and it's not just biological, it's also psychological and spiritual. And I think because we've gotten so far from that idea, because we've idealized the masculine, what we really need to get back to is understanding that role that we play in society on all these different levels. And also just to be reminded that children are not here, to destroy our lives. We are here to serve them. And that's the direction in which service has to go. They're not here to serve us or to be, a nice accessory, or, somehow serve us in some way, but it goes the exact opposite direction. We're meant to serve them. And when we are serving them, that's really where joy comes from, even in the midst of great suffering.
Very powerfully put. Carrie, well, you have a million vital themes. And then the sisterhood, and I'm fascinated with this just because of the family I come from, my own journey. And I don't want to make a hero out of myself here. I have many weaknesses, but there's one area that I just want to talk about here for a minute. When I went to university, for instance, I was on the campus, etc. I would walk into the graduate faculty lounge and it would all go quiet. They're all talking and I come in and they all go quiet. Well, because the evil right wing, Reaganite is here. And, I dealt with quite a bit in university because I'm a conservative. My point is, I was okay with that. I don't need to be part of any cliques, and I don't need to be this or that. I have my own friends and other avenues of my life. And why I say this is what's very foreign to me when I look at totalitarian movements. And Phyllis Chesler, and you write about her quite a bit in your work, and she's a real hero on many levels. She had the courage to leave the left, to stand against Islam, etc. But she writes about also the sisterhood, but the fear. It's much harder for a woman to leave the left than for a male to leave the left on several levels. Because, for instance, even when we look at, let's say, Facebook or Instagram profiles, you would often see a man's picture by himself, but women obviously are with their girlfriends in the pictures. And and that reveals something. And I tell this anecdote quite a bit, but during the lockdowns and COVID and all that stuff, I was in several gyms, involved in several athletic activities, and a lady would sometimes say, "Hey, can you take a video of me?" And she would be doing an exercise, and right before I do the video, she'd put her mask up. But she's not wearing a mask. She'd go, "Oh, Kathy and Betty will just kill me if they see me without the mask." And I would be like, "Oh, okay." Very foreign to me why this is being done. I'm sorry for this long introduction to this question, but I think it's important that in this sisterhood, the cliques that women operate in and how important it is to have the approval of each other. This is very important in terms of the cultish behavior that begins and the cultish thinking. It's terrifying for a woman to be excluded or excommunicated from her group. And so if a certain group are all feminists and wearing masks and having abortions, you got to go along with that unless you're a very brave and wise woman, right?
Yeah, no, I think that that's such a huge, huge component of it. And, in the culture, we actually see this sort of tribalism as something really good when it comes to fashion. She was very fashion forward or on point, or she looked, there, we embrace that. And, I don't think it has to be all bad, but what we don't realize is that it doesn't stop at fashion. It goes directly to ideas. It goes directly to all these vices that you've just described. And, there's a wonderful book I'd love to recommend to you called Warriors versus Warriors. And it's just this fascinating expose of sort of the way men think versus the way women think. And it's cross-cultural. It goes through tribes in Africa and all kinds of things. But very much at the heart of it, it shows even little girls know, the mean girl attitude. Like, where does that come from? And trying to be part of the group and all of that. So it's a very vital piece of the female psyche that I don't think we pay enough attention to, how much and how powerful it is on our daily lives. But that's the real challenge. And I think this is one of the reasons why feminism has had such staying power, because on the one hand, women feel this sort of magnetic pull into it because everybody else believes in it. Meanwhile, it's like kryptonite for men. Men don't want to talk about it. And, I don't blame men for that. I think this goes back to even, Adam didn't want to say anything to Eve. And, even before the fall, he didn't want to argue with his wife. So I think it's just this incredible challenge that women need to finally get brave enough and say, this is just a bunch of junk, and, start moving forward in a way that is actually leading and is healthy and, isn't waiting for somebody else to sort of start rescue us from ourselves. And I think being aware of what's going on and just how much social control there is through, as you mentioned, social media and just the tribalism that's there. And you can even see it, I think, in the movie Barbie, when that came out earlier. I think that was really an effort to sort of start shoring up the troops and just to remind women what the patriarchy is and how bad it is and how we can't survive without it, and how men are, there's not a single man in that movie that is necessary or good. They're all, idiots. So it's just this kind of like subtle reminder, like, ladies, we're important and you need to focus on this, especially as we're seeing a lot of women who are, changing their minds and doing things. There's this, actually was just this recently, there was an article in Glamour magazine called about soft girls. And this is in contrast to the girl boss, that the girl boss is out and sort of the soft girl, trad woman, all of these things are sort of coming in. And those things are not obviously in line with the narrative that feminists want. And so there's sort of this virtue signaling going on that, you've got to get back to us. Even we'll dress it up with little pink and some cute hairdos, but you need to, stay in line with what the feminist narrative is, which is, of course, that the patriarchy is bad and women are not.
Thank you, Carrie. So difficult sometimes for me, and speaking with somebody like you in such a positive way, because there's so many things I want to ask, because it's just filled with so much gold and so many diamonds in terms of what you're talking about. But this theme of how Adam listened to Eve, and you quote Mallory Millett quite a bit in your work. Great friend of the Freedom Center where we work. She's a wonderful person. It's such an honor to be in her company and all the things that she says and talks about. She's the sister of Kate, as you documented, but you quote her in the book that she points out the power of women. So even the example that I used earlier, this isn't because sometimes people misunderstand. We're not just I'm not bashing the women when I'm talking like this. I'm talking about that women have so much power, but it could be used for something negative rather than positive. So that cliquishness that I'm talking about, it has a negative component, but obviously there's a lot of power there, and there's something beautiful there that could be used for something beautiful. And so when Mallory, you quote her saying, look, God tells Adam to do something, but Adam listens to Eve instead of to God. So look at the power that women have. And that power could be used for something so beautiful and for something godly and divine. But if Satan grabs a hold of it, it could be used for disastrous things. But very powerful theme that you stress there, that Adam listened to Eve.
Yeah, no, I think that insight by Mallory is just really one of those, ones that I just wish I could communicate to every woman.
Yeah.
What is it that's our real power? And, I think even just looking at the question of beauty and a woman's beauty, there's something really interesting about it, because how much money is spent by women to be beautiful. There's this intrinsic desire to be beautiful. And it's not just vanity. I mean, that's obviously the negative side of it, but I think some of it is this idea of where women's power is, because we are supposed to reflect the beauty of God, and we're supposed to, one of the things that we can do is elevate a man. There's a great quote by Fulton Sheen where he talks about the level of a civilization can be, you can figure it out based on where the women in the culture are, because women have the capacity to lift men up, to make them better people. But that means that women have to be better themselves than the men are. And, that's the real tragedy, I think, of our culture now, is that women have this impression that they just need to be another one of the guys. And that's really where they're going to have this, the success and the relationships that they want, because women are very relational and driven by this desire to have strong relationships. And so they think if they just are one of the guys, then that is really going to be sufficient. But that's really like taking out at the knees the real gifts that a woman has in her capacity to elevate the culture and civilization and to make something very beautiful, not just biologically, but also through their souls and the ways in which they interact and care for others.
Thank you so much, Carrie. We're going to take a quick break with our sponsors. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell. Years ago, when I invented My Pillow, I was faced with every adversity you could think of. No retailers wanted to sell My Pillow. That's come full circle. Vendors took advantage of me, and I was copied by China. Well, by the grace of God, I was able to get through all that and learn from it. I have a passion to help other U.S. entrepreneurs, and that's why I created my new platform, mystore.com. We have hundreds of products from amazing entrepreneurs, and to celebrate, I'm going to put My Pillows on mystore.com right now. You can get my standard My Pillows regularly $69.98, now only $19.98 with your promo code. Or you can get my standard queen size, regular $79.98, now only $29.98. Or you can get my premium king size, regularly $89.98, now only $34.98. So go to mystore.com and use that promo code on your screen to get huge discounts on all My Store products. Thank you and God bless.
And we are back with Dr. Carrie Gress, the author of the new book, The End of Women. Carrie, right before our break, we were talking about your book, The End of Woman, and the power of women and how it could be used for beautiful, divine things, and how it can also be manipulated by evil forces to see the destruction we see today. One of the destructions that we see today that you talk about and document very powerfully, as you document so many other things, just what's happened to the depiction of men and to men. And we definitely see a war on men. All you have to do is turn the TV on, any TV series, any movie. It's actually beyond creepy. It's always, there's always this there's always this masculine female boss now. And then there's just some kind of effeminate guy that's her servant or something running errands for her. This is in every film now. And there's all these men, they're all klutzes and they're all bumping into each other, and the women are just shaking their heads. And where would men be without women? They're pressing this very hard, as we know. The days of Chuck Norris and Sylvester Stallone and Steven Seagal are all gone. It's just all these effeminate men weaving sweaters or knitting sweaters or something. It's creepy, and but we think about it in a divine, in the spiritual battle. And I was thinking, our Father who art in heaven, our Father, our God, our Lord, He has a masculine, yes, we can get into that. I understand that this is a whole theological debate, that there are also feminine, quote unquote, attributes to the heavenly God. But overall, God is our Father, masculine. And somewhere, really, this is actually a demonic rebellion against our Father in heaven, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think if you really look at the way that certainly in Genesis and the way that God has set up on the earth, the order in which things are cared for. You see, God is at the head. God is that it's through him that we have a happy life. Then he gives Adam his authority, and then from there is the helpmate Eve, and through that's where they are fruitful. But you can also see sort of this service from largest down to smallest, because it's through their love that they have a child, and it's almost like Russian dolls. But the effort is to really protect that which is smallest and vulnerable. And women are obviously vulnerable in a way that men aren't. Men are made to protect, provide, and propagate. And that order has been completely inverted by feminism. Certainly that idea of Genesis 3, the inversion of Genesis 3, where you've got the serpent talking to Eve, and then Eve is in charge of Adam, and then God's nowhere in the picture. So it's really interesting to start looking at it from that much more biblical, theological, historical perspective, what has happened. And you can see just the importance of a woman being open to the authority that her husband has. And I don't mean that, the hard thing is to talk about this is because the left has also not only controlled their message, but they've controlled what they project what our message should be, which is sort of the Handmaid's Tale. If you aren't on the left, or you're not, a part of this narrative, then you're going to end up becoming part of a fertility cult or something. So it's very hard to talk about it in terms that people don't already have sort of these fixed categories. But I guess that's really where the challenge is for women to start understanding, well, what happens when I actually really respect my husband, and I don't think that he's an idiot and he can't do anything without me, which is, exactly what the portrayal is on TV that you were outlining previously. So I think it's really incredible to start listening to men. I've spent a lot of time. In fact, it's been really wonderful to see how many men have really taken to this book, because I'm not beating men up in it. I think you've taken the blame for everything for 50 years. There can be some books that don't blame you for everything. And I think they appreciate that. And it's really beautiful to see the gifts that men have, when they know that they can use them, and when they also feel that the confidence that their wife has in them, how much further a couple can go. And I know in my own marriage that's been an incredible gift that my husband and I give to each other, in terms of just trusting each other as ordered in the way that God designed it, instead of feeling like we are constantly at this loggerheads and battle for power in our family.
Thank you, Carrie. I want to touch on Mary here, Jesus's mom. Always a little bit difficult to approach these very sacred issues. I've been giving a lot of thought to this over the years, so I'm very intrigued and very moved by your work, the Anti-Mary, and the things you've discussed as how feminism is very much the opposite, and as a war on the image of Mary and the reality of Mary. So I'll just be... There's something very anti-Mary in our culture in general. And so you document all of this, and in general, we can just turn on the TV or, even the music now with this Sexy Red, her name is, the rap, and I'll spare our audience the lyrics. But this is anti-Mary, and there's something... It's very interesting. I was always thinking that the more coarse, I was always wondering, why do they need to make everything so coarse? Because the coarser they make things, then when we become so coarse, we become desensitized, not just to spiritual things, but when they begin to politically take over and rule, we're so desensitized, we're desensitized politically and spiritually. So I'm just thinking out loud here, but there's definitely something very anti-Mary, but it's even, as we know, within among Protestants, and I've always been very curious at that, and actually even a little bit frightened by it. And so just very often, as you can imagine, this will come up with Protestants, and they'll say, you shouldn't worship Mary. We only worship Jesus. And I want to be very careful here with what I say. We have to be careful in using the Lord's name in vain. But when they always say we only worship Jesus, we only worship Jesus as well. But the way that they go on about it, it's a little bit haunting because, for instance, it's always very repetitive with them. It's this ongoing circle of nothingness. We'll explain to them, us Catholics, we don't worship Mary. We don't worship her. We worship Jesus. We honor and venerate Mary. Then they'll say, well, Mary's dead. Okay, so not everyone is dead. Mary's not dead. Then you bring up the book of Revelation where the saints are in heaven asking the Lord for justice for what's happening on earth and etc. And so they start losing that debate that everyone's dead and Mary's dead. And then they start yelling at you that we're confessing to priests. Then you start talking about how Jesus said for us to tell sins to one another. And then all of a sudden we're back to that we worship Mary again. It's just, anyway, I'm sure you know what I'm referring to, but it's haunting. And I've always wondered where does all of this stem from? When Jesus says, John, this is your mother, this is your son. This is Jesus's mom. Why would you be so hostile to the mother of Jesus Christ? I often think that it's what you're writing about too, that behind all of this, behind feminism, behind communism, there's envy, there's some kind of envy and jealousy and resentment. And I've been thinking the last couple of years that within the Protestant ranks, maybe there's an envy and jealousy of Jesus's mom, and that there may actually be a hierarchy of who's important to God and to Jesus. And there's certain humans that want to be number one. It's a kind of pretension to equality. And there's an envy of Jesus's mom and her sacred importance. What do you think of that?
I've actually never really thought about it from that angle. I obviously have thought about it plenty, and I know there are so many Protestants that I've engaged with who are being very earnest and genuine, and obviously don't want to offend God. And so I understand where that's coming from. Obviously, what you're speaking about is a deeper impulse, and I think more on the grand scale of things is back to what we were talking about earlier, is this kind of brokenness that we've been dealing with. We've had abortion on demand since the 1970s. We've had children who have not been raised properly because they've been sent to school to take care of them. There's so many emotional needs that are not being met. And we have, now we're in the third, fourth generation of that. So I think the bigger issue is the pervasiveness. And I think this is one of the reasons why women are targeted, because it's very hard to feel any kind of attraction towards a mother if you don't actually have a mother that loved you in a right and ordered way. So I think this is why women, like, if you can erase womanhood on the level in which it exists on earth, then it makes it much harder to transition to a godly mother, or not that she's God, but you know what I mean. A one that was the mother of God. So I think you see this also with the same thing with fatherhood. You hear there's all these studies that have been done about men who don't have good fathers and women, and it makes it very difficult for them to actually believe in God. So I think it's just that basic imprint of the mother and father that make it very difficult for people to see clearly. And certainly envy could be part of it. Fear could be part of it. But I think that fundamental not having the being mothered in a proper way, that mother wound, really is a very difficult thing. And I think it's actually one of those things that once people overcome it, the beauty and the healing that can come to women in particular when they start opening themselves up to the idea of what is God's mother like? That's a very big question and leads to all kinds of incredible, beautiful answers that no one can anticipate if you have never thought about it before.
Thank you, Carrie, so much. Just have a little bit time left. I wish we had 5 hours. But some of your key themes, and you stress how in feminism overall, it turns out that the millions of babies that are killed is not a problem. And this is a key element here. And so we're just tying a lot of these themes up, or trying to Mary giving birth, babies being killed, not a problem in feminism, and children not being part of even the formula. But Mary not just giving birth, Mary giving birth to our Savior. And so it's not a coincidence that there's such an anti-Mary disposition. So powerful when you bring up this envy and resentment, and where feminism goes wrong, in the sense that instead of trying to empower women through women's power, instead there's quote unquote what you quote, we hate you, but we want to become everything you are, when they talk to men. And so something is very wrong there. And it seems like I'm bringing up different themes, but they're all woven together here. And I really love something that you said there, and loving it in terms of just how powerful it is, that how in general we know that this whole communist leftist movement is to make yourselves gods. And you write about how, in feminism also, the feminists, the women, they're making themselves gods. But you see, in our relationship with God, we give, he gives. We give, he gives. There's a reciprocity. You talk about serving your children, that there's some kind of reciprocity of love and giving. And you point out that in feminism, it's actually a movement that's given nothing back. What has it given back to you? Perhaps let's close on that theme.
Yeah, no, I think that is absolutely a great way to articulate it, that idea of it not giving back, to sort of crystallize that, because it's really just something which absorbs or controls. And that's where you see this idea of women being made to have other people serve them. And you even see this, like you were mentioning, the young man that's there to serve the powerful woman, who's effeminate and whatnot. They want men to not be men and to become more like women. Again, it's all this sort of putting on a pedestal womanhood in the place of where God is. And this is again why we see the goddess worship, we see the pagan ideas, the cultish ideas. So it's absolutely this sort of internal self-serving, disordered effort to turn us into or to help us, make us believe that we are the deity, instead of the humble creature that God, the creator, created.
Yeah, the self-anointed redeemers. I have an honor to have the producer of my show, Annie Cyrus, who is on the front lines fighting for freedom for America, but a large part of her life, because she escaped Iran, and she was forced into child marriage when she was a little girl. She fights for women, for girls' rights under gender apartheid, especially in Islam. Annie has also found Jesus Christ, or perhaps Jesus Christ found her. But we cannot end the show without maybe a comment from Annie or a question from Annie. Is there something perhaps we didn't cover, Annie?
Well, thanks for your kind words, Jamie. And I do want to add something. It's just a phrase. As a feminist myself, I have always said the feminism in the Western countries have reduced the hope for the real feminists to be able to fight for equality. You compare countries like my motherland, Islamic Republic of Iran, when at age 9, you become an adult woman by law. And from there, you can become somebody's wife. From there, you can become a mother. You compare that, quote unquote, equality to what at least American women have. And I always I try my best to talk to them, to remind them, number one, if you want to be God, that is your choice. But when you poison that idea into other areas of life, to your children, to your nieces, to your neighbors, and thanks to technology, it has spread so far that
Mhm.
you could make the inhuman act of a lot of Islamic countries to become so normalized, because there's a my body, my choice. It's okay if babies are being killed. It's okay if a 9-year-old girl is being considered a woman, sold into sex slavery, raped over and over. What you guys are doing, you're not a feminist, you're a feminazi. Your
Mhm.
hatred for God and for man have created such a bubble, such a delusion, that you don't understand you are destroying human society as we
Mhm.
know it. But
Mhm.
regardless of how hard they try, I truly believe that our Lord will protect those who need his protection, and he will show the right path to those who have lost it.
Mhm. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And that's really where, we know it's from Christianity that we understand that women have equal dignity, that we're different, but we have equal dignity to men. This didn't come from other religions. And I think that's obviously incredibly important to stress, is that the equal dignity that we have. And just so tragic to hear the way it's abused, and we know it's been abused in the past, and that there are injustices that absolutely need to be rectified. But as you point out, the way in which feminism in the United States is trying to make that happen, and the way it's been exported to largely the four corners of the world, it's destroying women. It's not creating justice. It's actually creating deeper injustice, because it's just flipping it in a lot of respects, because it's now damaging millions of children a year, certainly through abortion, but in other ways, over sexualization of children and whatnot. And it's also damaging men tremendously. And it's certainly not helping women either. So I think all that's well said.
Annie Cyrus, did you hand it back to me, or do you?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just enjoying the conversation. I'm very grateful for Carrie's book, but I just wanted to add that different point of view, I guess, into the wonderful discussion you're having.
Thank you so much, Annie. Well, that's also very much connected to, when I'm fighting for women's rights in the Islamic world, I've been on the university campuses, and, I'll come up to the feminists that are for women's rights, and I'll say, excuse me, you're for women's rights. Can you just sign this petition against female genital mutilation in the Islamic world, and to at least expose the Islamic texts that inspire and sanction it? And they'll look at me and, they just, for them, it's just the woman who has 5 abortions, she needs to have 6 and 7. That's women's rights to Western feminism, quote unquote. I think so. This is a tragedy here somewhere. Carrie, so sorry if we've kept you too long, but we love you and admire you and so value your work. We don't want to just leave perhaps on these depressing themes, which are real, but perhaps let's end just a couple minutes with some hope and the potential journey back to sanity of some kind, where men and women can both find their power and their realms and create something that maybe is not maybe that God wants. Just maybe talk a little bit about us coming home or back home.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of reasons for hope, largely because we're seeing these different groups and movements. When you get moms active and things, you've got Moms for America, Moms for Liberty. Those groups are doing incredible work. But I think that the real thing that I'm seeing is that women are just beginning to reject it and just say, this isn't working. This isn't appealing. Why are we doing this? And I think also the other exciting thing is just to really realize what happens when you allow a woman to be who women are, instead of trying to be like men. The last chapter of my book actually talks a lot about this idea of how do we start kind of creating a new grammar of understanding ourselves as women. And I've had people tell me they just read through that chapter and they just cried through the whole thing, because when you start really thinking about and seeing how beautiful women can be and the capacities that we have when we're using the gifts that we have for the good, it's beautiful. It's compelling. It's, it's something to wonder at. It's something that we want. And I think we need a lot more of that. I think if we could be more involved in the culture and portray women as that instead of as either, part of a fertility cult or the opposite of what we're seeing in the culture today, all the negative, that could go a long way. And I'm always encouraging people to be more involved on cultural level, because that's been, I think, where as conservatives we've really dropped the ball too. But yeah, I think there's a lot of hope. And like I said, men really like this book, and I think it's giving them a sense that it's all right to be men, and that they have their ways in which they can be strong in their marriages. They don't have to do it in a way that's a battle with their wives, but there's a way in which that they can lead, and that they can lead their children and their wives and their families back to something healthy and ordered. So I think there's a lot of places where we can look for hope at this stage of the game.
Carrie, fascinating discussion. Thank you. Very powerful. I think we could agree something went wrong with feminism when the final product is a 60-year-old man pretending he's a 14-year-old girl inside a girls' soccer changing room. When a guy named Bill says his name is Kathy and he's crushing a girl's skull in an MMA cage, something's not right, I think, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Dr. Carrie Gress, you are wonderful. Thank you for writing The End of Woman and all your other books. These are the essential issues of our time. Thank you for so nobly and courageously documenting and for standing up for the truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much. And make sure to get Dr. Carrie Gress's book, The End of Women. Get that immediately and read it and make it a Christmas present. We'll see you soon on the Glazov Gang. Good night.